LGBT rights in Russia. LGBT rights, an international issue. Many LGBT people around the globe are living in fear as they attempt to gain their voice to fight for their rights. Many governments across the world criminalize the very identities of LGBT people. LGBT rights, an international issue. Currently, there are criminal penalties for being gay in Uganda and Nigeria. India and Australia have attempted to move forward with LGBT rights, but each of these countries have had these laws overturned. Transgender youth in Jamaica are being murdered. There are reparative therapies being done in Latin America. There are acts of anti-gay discrimination in Eastern Europe. In certain states in the U.S., same-sex couples are still unable to be married. 40% of the world's population lives in one of the 81 countries where homosexuality is a crime. 10 of these countries carry the death penalty for being homosexual. There have been over 1,000 murders of transgender people reported in the last 6 years. LGBT rights in Russia. During the last 20 years, there was not much attention focused on LGBT rights in Russia. Until 1993, being a gay man in Russia could result in incarceration. 500 to 1,000 men were annually incarcerated for being gay in Russia between 1960 and 1990. Although Article 12.1 that criminalized sex between men in Russia was lifted in 1993, Russia's free 90s continued to view homosexuality as anti-Russian. This is because it was considered undermining to Russian norms. The International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission was formed in 1991, taking 90 American LGBT activists to the Soviet Union to advocate for fair rights for the gay and lesbian community. Unfortunately, violence continued against the LGBT people throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s. In 1996, Russia joined the Council of Europe and adopted its jurisprudence and norms. In 1997, transgender Russians were allowed to legally change their gender on identity documents. Unfortunately, in 2006 and 2011 through 2013, laws were passed in different regions of Russia banning homosexuality propaganda. This includes any public discussion or portrayal of non-traditional sexual relationships. This law was passed with the intent to protect minors.
This Human Rights Watch report is sharply critical of Russia's record on protecting gay rights. Not only have Russian authorities failed to prevent and prosecute homophobic violence, the report says, but they have effectively legalized discrimination in the country. The report identifies the controversial Russian anti-gay propaganda law as being an issue of major concern. Russian officials say the law is meant to protect children from so-called gay propaganda that might encourage them to adopt a homosexual lifestyle in the future. The Human Rights Watch says that, in fact, the law protects nobody, but does give homophobes a reason to believe that the lives of gay people matter less to the Russian government. Well, in terms of reaction, the authorities here have so far been tight-lipped, but in the past, the Russian president himself, Vladimir Putin, has defended the country's stance on gay rights, saying that homosexuals in Russia are free from persecution. Matthew Chance, CNN Moscow.
Penalties. Failure to follow this law results in a fine of 4,000 to 5,000 rubles, 120 to 150 US. Corporations or other legal entities can be fined up to 800,000 to 1 million rubles, 24,000 to 30,000 US. Propaganda transported over the internet can result in more severe fines. Foreigners who fail to follow this law may be incarcerated for 15 days. The 2014 Sochi Olympics. In 2014, Russia hosted the Winter Olympics in Sochi. This event shed light on Putin's anti-gay law as individuals around the world were being called to Russia for the Olympics. There had been strong international criticisms that caused protesting of the boycott of the Games. Many gay rights activists were arrested during the Olympics and faced fines and prison sentences. Current problems. Russia's anti-gay propaganda law exposes many LGBT people to violence, physical and psychological abuse, harassment, and stigma. Russian authorities are sending a dangerous message that it is acceptable to be violent towards LGBT people without any consequences. LGBT people have noticed an increase in harassment since the passing of the anti-gay law, and they predict an even larger increase as the years go on. In 2013, the Russian LGBT network conducted an anonymous survey in Russia on discrimination against the LGBT community. Over half of the respondents experienced psychological abuse and 15% experienced physical abuse. Only 6% contacted the police. LGBT people have become more depressed, closed off, and discouraged since the passing of the propaganda law. Venues refuse to book LGBT events, and Russian journalists refuse to cover LGBT stories with fear of the consequences of the law and the violence of the anti-gay activists. Finally, the LGBT movement is being increasingly hurt due to supporters choosing to emigrate. Globalization. Currently, LGBT rights are being violated not only in Russia but across the globe, even in the US. Anti-gay violence calls social workers to focus in on the core values of human rights and social justice. The actions of Russia both directly and indirectly affect other countries' social well-being. An example of this can be seen at the 2014 Sochi Olympics, as individuals from across the world were impacted by Russia's policy. Globalization can be used by governments of different nations to come together to share ideas to combat anti-gay laws and prejudices. Globalization can also be used to reduce stigma against the LGBT community as a whole, with the aim towards equal human rights for all. The United Nations. In September 2014, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted a resolution to condemn violence and discrimination against LGBT people around the globe. This is the second time that the UN has referred to LGBT rights as human rights. Currently, this resolution has no enforcement and is mostly a symbolic gesture. However, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has spoken out about Russia's anti-gay law, condemning the policy for discriminating against the LGBT community. The United Nations stands strongly behind their Free and Equal campaign.
The UN Secretary-General has condemned sexual discrimination and attacks on homosexuals in comments that have echoed widespread concerns about Russia's so-called gay propaganda laws. Ban Ki-moon made no direct reference to gay rights in Russia, but he told the International Olympic Committee there must be greater tolerance.
We must all raise our voices against attacks on lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, or intersex people. We must oppose the arrest, imprisonment, and discriminatory restrictions they face.
Critics say the gay propaganda law curtails the rights of homosexuals and discriminates against them. But Putin, who signed the law last summer, says it's intended to protect minors and that homosexuals will not be discriminated against during the Olympics.
Amnesty International. Amnesty International supports the full range of human rights for all people, without exception. Amnesty International encourages all people to write to Russian authorities to urge them to end prosecution and ensure full respect of all LGBT people. President Obama. In response to Russia's anti-gay law, President Obama has been quoted stating, "Instead of targeting our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, we can use our laws to protect their rights. Instead of defining ourselves in opposition to others, we can affirm the aspirations that we hold in common. That's what will make America strong. That's what will make Europe strong. That's what makes us who we are." Summary. Anti-gay violence continues to occur all over the globe, and some countries, specifically Russia, have anti-gay laws in place that negatively affect the human rights of the LGBT community. It is extremely evident that we have a long way to go in fighting for equality. We must join together globally to address these human rights issues and encourage equal human rights and justice for all. These actions will take positive steps towards reducing the stigma associated with the LGBT community.